Last Friday morning, I stood on the courthouse steps, documents in hand, watching my only son smirk at me, as if I were nothing more than a stranger in his way. 3 nights earlier, he left a photo on my doorstep. It was a picture of my house, with the word "sold" scrawled in red marker across it. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stared at that door and whispered to myself, "They think I'm done. Not yet." What he didn't know was that I had already recorded every forged signature, every false transaction, and that morning I came with a lawyer, a retired detective, and a case that could bury them both. But just when I thought the fight was over, he looked me in the eye and said, "You can choose, Dad, family, or the house." And I realized I might lose both. Follow my story until the end, and tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far a father's voice can still reach. The wind had a cruel bite that night, sneaking through the gaps in the old windows like it had something to prove. I was up late, later than usual, sitting in my recliner with a mug of lukewarm chamomile, flipping through a worn photo album that still smelled faintly of Emmeline's lavender sachets. Each picture was a moment I had stored away, like keepsakes in a drawer I didn't dare open too often. Then the phone rang. The old landline nearly made me spill my tea. I reached over, heart tapping a little faster, and glanced at the screen. Kellen. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. A mix of relief and worry flushed through me. I pressed the green button and brought the receiver to my ear. "Hey, Dad," he said, flat. "Son, it's late. Everything okay?" There was a pause, just long enough for my gut to tighten. "I got married today," he said. "Reagan and I. It was just us and the officiant. Simple." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "You got married?" "Yeah. Also, I've sold the apartment and the car. We're leaving the city." I blinked. "Leaving? Where to? Why didn't you? You won't see me again, Dad." The silence on the line seemed louder than the words. I sat there, clutching the phone, as though my grip could hold him from disappearing. But the line went dead. I stayed frozen, the receiver still at my ear, listening to a dial tone that felt colder than the air outside. The room shrank around me. The photographs lay scattered on my lap, Emmeline smiling in every one, her eyes so full of life, and now our only son had just vanished from mine. Tick, tick, tick. The grandfather clock by the fireplace seemed to mock the quiet. My eyes fixed on the phone. I wanted it to ring again, for this to be some cruel misunderstanding, but it didn't, and I knew it wouldn't. I sat there for what could have been minutes or hours, listening to the storm tap against the glass like a ghost trying to come in. Kellen's voice kept playing in my head. Not the words, those I remembered, but the tone, cold, hollow, like someone reading from a script. My thoughts spiraled. Why now? Why the secrecy? Why the distance these past few months? The memories rushed in. How he brushed off our last few Sunday dinners, citing Reagan's work schedule. How he dodged questions about his finances, the condo, his future. How he said Reagan was reading about minimalist living and kept calling things clutter with a weird edge in her voice. None of it seemed right then. Now, it all snapped into place like a jigsaw puzzle I didn't want to finish. Something, or someone, was behind this. Kellen had always been passionate, a bit impulsive. But this, cutting ties in a single midnight call, that wasn't him, unless he was being pushed. Sleep was out of the question. I paced the hallway, the hardwood creaking under my feet like it disapproved of every step. In the kitchen, I washed the same mug twice without realizing it. I stared at the dining table, remembering the Thanksgiving plans we had half discussed and never finalized. I thought about the sacrifices, the late nights I worked double shifts after Emmeline passed, just to keep Kellen in school, the baseball games, the science fairs, the college move-in day where I cried and pretended it was just allergies. I thought we were closer than this. Around 4 a.m, I sat back down, heart hollowed out and mind racing. There had to be more. People don't just vanish into thin air, not without a reason or a plan. I remembered Kellen once mentioned that Reagan wanted to get off the grid. Whatever that meant, I hadn't paid attention then. Now, I couldn't think of anything else. Tomorrow, I'd start with the apartment building, Records. Neighbors. Maybe the property manager had something. I wouldn't barge in like a madman. I'd be quiet, careful. But I wasn't going to sit back and let my son vanish without answers. I stood and walked to the front window. The wind had died down, but the night still held its breath. I stared at the empty driveway. Kellen's car used to sit there, gleaming with promise. Now it was just bare concrete, like he'd never been there at all. A whisper slipped from my lips before I even realized it. If you think I'm just going to disappear quietly, you're wrong. The morning light filtered through the slats of the blinds, casting pale stripes across the hardwood floor. I hadn't slept more than an hour, maybe 2, and whatever rest I did get had been fitful, fractured by the echo of my son's voice. Dad, you won't see me again. The words gnawed at the edge of my mind like termites in old timber. By 6:15 a.m., I was dressed and standing by the front door, coat on, keys in hand. Old habits die hard, pressed slacks, a crisp shirt, polished shoes. Even in the middle of confusion, dignity still mattered. Maybe it was a remnant of my military years. Or maybe it was just my way of refusing to unravel. I skipped breakfast. Not out of forgetfulness. I remembered the toast in the kitchen and the jar of honey I always paired it with, but the idea of chewing, swallowing, felt impossible. I needed answers more than I needed food. Downtown Asheville still carried the hush of dawn when I parked outside the county building. A damp wind curled through the narrow side streets, carrying the scent of wet leaves and something else, something old and sour, like a memory left too long in a closed drawer. Inside, the county clerk's office smelled of paper and printer ink. A young woman with tired eyes looked up from behind a desk. I'd like to see the latest property transactions involving either Merrick Halloway or Kellen Halloway, I said, steady but firm. She typed quickly, her nails clicking against the keys. After a moment, she frowned slightly and turned the screen toward me. We have a deed here, sale finalized 2 weeks ago. You signed it, Mr. Halloway. The breath caught in my throat. That's impossible. I've never been here. Never signed a thing. She hesitated, then printed the document and handed it over. There it was, my name in bold, unmistakable ink. A signature that mirrored mine with unnerving accuracy. Same curl on the H, same downward slope on the K. But I saw it immediately. The angle of the letters, the slight hesitation in the pen stroke. Whoever forged it had studied me closely, but not closely enough. I stared at the paper for a long time, my jaw tight. Rage didn't erupt. It seeped in, slow and thick, coating everything. Outside, I leaned against the cold metal of my car and stared at the paper again. Kellen, or Reagan, or both. The thought turned in my gut like spoiled food. I drove straight to Kellen's apartment, barely noticing the golden leaves swirling across the road. The parking lot was empty, no sign of his car. My heart thudded harder. I knocked, 3 short raps, then again, louder. After a few moments, the door cracked open. Reagan stood there, hair curled and perfectly in place, lips glossed in the same unsettling mauve she always wore. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Well, this is unexpected, she said sweetly, her voice as sharp as chipped glass. I need to speak to Kellen. She tilted her head. He's not here, and he doesn't want to be disturbed. I'm his father. Her expression didn't change. He asked me to handle things. He's moving on. You should too. I stepped forward, but she slipped outside and closed the door behind her with a soft click, keeping it between us like a barricade. You're making this harder than it has to be, she whispered, her voice low but pointed. You're not helping yourself. What's going on, Reagan? What have you done? She didn't answer directly, just looked at me the way someone might look at a dog who'd outlived its usefulness. From now on, she said softly, it's just us, Kellen and me. You need to let go, for everyone's sake. I felt the words hit like hail, each one colder than the last. Before I could respond, she turned and slipped back inside. A moment later, the metallic click of the deadbolt twisting echoed down the empty corridor. I tried the handle. Locked. That's when I noticed it. the glint of new brass. The locks had been changed. Back in my car. I sat gripping the forged deed in both hands. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the city noise. Somewhere deep in my chest, a dull ache pulsed. Grief, rage, or maybe both. "You can shut the door in my face," I muttered to no one, "but you won't erase me from my own life." And as the sun rose over Asheville, casting long shadows across the pavement, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever this was, it had been in motion for a long time. I had missed the signs. Not anymore. The roads of Asheville stretched out like veins beneath the gray sky. Each turn familiar, but laced now with something colder. I drove without a destination, steering through neighborhoods where Kellen used to ride his bike, where Emmeline and I once strolled on cool evenings. My hands gripped the wheel tighter every time Reagan's voice echoed in my mind, sweet as syrup, sharp as a blade. "You're making this harder on yourself. Let it go. Let it go." A laugh escaped me, dry and joyless. You don't let go when your life is being carved away from the inside. You don't just watch it happen like a silent movie. I passed the little cafe where Kellen and I celebrated his first job. He was only 19 then, full of spitfire ideas and a stubborn sense of right and wrong. I remembered how he refused to order dessert, saying he'd rather save the money. I ordered 2 slices of pecan pie anyway. He ate them both. Back then, he would have walked through fire for me. Now he wouldn't even crack the door. That memory faded into another, less pleasant one. 6 months ago, Howard and I had been sitting at the VFW hall, he nursing a Bud Light, me sipping coffee I didn't need. He leaned in, voice low. "You know Reagan's not the kind to marry for love, right? I've seen women like that before. She's got hungry eyes." Merrick. I brushed it off, called it jealousy or speculation. Howard's words had seemed bitter then, and I chalked them up to a lonely man's misgivings. But now they festered like old wounds I'd ignored. I turned onto Ashbury Road, instinct guiding me more than thought. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the gravel lot of my storage unit. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and something metallic, maybe just in my imagination. I entered the code, waited for the steel door to grind open, and stepped inside. Dust hung in the air like memory. I flicked on the light and scanned the stacks of boxes I'd so carefully arranged over the years. But something was off. I felt it before I saw it. 3 boxes were missing. Not just any boxes, the ones labeled in Emmeline's handwriting: legal, personal, deeds, house, letters, Emmeline Merrick. I stood frozen. These weren't just things. They were records of love, of sacrifice, of the life we built brick by brick. Gone. I marched to the front desk, my heart hammering in my chest. The young clerk looked up, surprised. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Has anyone else accessed Unit 47 recently?" He typed on his keyboard, eyes narrowing. "Yeah, says here a Kellen Hadley signed in 2 weeks ago. Said he had the spare key." I stared at him, willing my mouth to form words. "Did he take anything?" "I didn't see, sir. He just came and left. 15 minutes. Tops." I nodded, turned, and walked back to the unit. My steps felt uneven, like I was walking on a floor that might give way at any second. Back inside, I tore through what was left. The smell of old paper and cedarwood overwhelmed me. Then, near the back, I spotted something out of place. An envelope, torn open, addressed to me. I held it in trembling fingers, my eyes scanning the letter inside. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, dated 3 weeks ago. A formal acknowledgement of my consent to transfer ownership of a joint investment account. One I shared with Kellen, one I had never intended to touch. I read the words again and again, hoping they'd rearrange themselves into something sane, but the meaning stayed the same. Consent I never gave. A signature that looked eerily like mine, different pen stroke, less pressure on the looped K. But close enough. I sank onto a crate, the paper slipping to the concrete floor. My mind whirled with images. Kellen at Christmas last year, helping me carry groceries, smiling like he always had. Reagan brushing his arm at Thanksgiving, laughing at my old stories, pretending to care. All of it now felt rehearsed, staged, a play meant to end with me vanishing quietly, grateful to be forgotten. I sat there until the light overhead clicked off automatically, leaving me in semi-darkness. Only then did I move. Locking the unit behind me, I walked slowly to my truck. The sun had dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows that followed me like ghosts. Sliding into the driver's seat, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My eyes landed on the empty passenger seat where Emmeline's scarf still hung from the headrest. Her handwriting, her love letters, her memories, gone. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. They're not just shutting me out, they're dismantling my life piece by piece. The living room was swallowed in darkness, the faint outline of the furniture barely visible under the dim light seeping through the curtains. I sat in my recliner, motionless, a heavy stillness pressing against my chest. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that follows a blow you didn't see coming. The kind that stretches between heartbeats like something's about to break. My thoughts circled around the missing boxes at the storage unit and the letter from the law firm. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't just about impulsive decisions or young love. This was planned, calculated. And I was the obstacle quietly being erased. Then, the phone vibrated on the side table beside me. It buzzed against the wood with a sharpness that startled me out of the spiral. The screen lit up. Kellen. I stared at his name like it belonged to someone I used to know. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up. Hello? My voice was low, cautious. Hi. Dad, Kellen said. Calm. Too calm. I didn't want to leave things unsaid. There was a stillness in his tone that didn't match the storm in my chest. I got married today, he said plainly. Just the two of us. Courthouse. Quick. I closed my eyes. There it was. Again. A second announcement. But this time from his lips directly. Still no emotion. No apology. No sense that I'd been left out of something important. We've sold the apartment, he continued. And the car, too. We? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. Yeah, Reagan and I. We figured. New chapter. New start. Somewhere far. Away from the noise. The noise, I guessed, was me. How long have you been planning this? I asked, not expecting an honest answer. There was a pause. Does it matter? Everything in me tightened. The boy I raised was still there, somewhere under that tone. But this man speaking to me, he felt like a stranger. Kellen, please, I said, leaning forward. At least let me see you. Talk this through. Something doesn't feel right. There was another silence, longer this time. Then came the blow. You won't see me again, Dad. I froze. I think it's better this way. And then the line went dead. For a moment, I didn't realize I was still holding the phone. My fingers ached from the grip. I slowly lowered it, letting the silence take over again. But it wasn't the same as before. This was something colder. I stared at the window. The reflection staring back at me felt hollow. Kellen's voice echoed through my mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. Married, sold, gone. I had always imagined a different kind of goodbye, one that came with old age or fading memory. Not this, not a deliberate erasure. The room felt smaller, heavier. I sank deeper into the chair, trying to understand how it had come to this. What had I missed? How long had they been laying the bricks of this distance while I was busy believing we were still a family? I opened my phone again, scrolling through contacts until I landed on Howard. He'd warned me once before. I hadn't listened. I hovered over the call button. They're not just shutting me out, I muttered. They're cutting off everything that makes me, me. I tapped the screen. Howard picked up after 2 rings. Hello? His voice was steady, but I could tell he already knew who it was. "It's Merrick," I said. "I need to know everything." Howard exhaled on the other end. "I was hoping you'd call." The wheels of my car barely touched the ground as I left the diner parking lot, the tires kicking up mist from the early morning fog. The roads were quiet, but inside me, a storm raged louder than anything nature could conjure. Howard's words repeated in my mind like a cursed loop. "Merrick, I think they're coming for your house next." The dashboard clock glowed 4:12 a.m., but I felt no fatigue, just fire and fear. I sped past dimly lit intersections and sleepy storefronts, heading home with one single thought. If they were really planning to take my house, the last piece of my life that still felt mine, I needed to get ahead of them. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a moment longer, engine running, hands frozen on the steering wheel. I glanced up at the porch light, still on like always. That soft glow used to be comforting. Tonight, it felt like a spotlight, exposing everything I'd failed to see coming. Inside, I locked the door behind me, double-checked it, and paced the hallway like a man being hunted. I brewed a pot of coffee I wouldn't drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the floral wallpaper Emmeline had picked decades ago. This house wasn't just walls and floors, it was history. It was her laugh echoing in the hallways. It was Kellen's baby steps. It was mine. Around 5 a.m. I powered on my old desktop and pulled up the county property database. The screen loaded slowly, painfully, as if it too understood the weight of what I was about to learn. When I finally entered my address, a sense of nausea washed over me. The records listed a pending transfer of ownership, scheduled within the next 3 business days. My name was still there, but next to it was a field marked "Review underway, verification pending." I clicked deeper into the file. A PDF of the authorization form opened on screen. My name, my signature. But I had never signed anything. My eyes scanned the document. It was dated 4 weeks ago. The same week Kellen had told me he was just too busy to stop by. The same week he'd asked, out of the blue, if I still had that spare key to the desk drawer where I kept old tax documents. I felt the air being sucked out of the room. By 6 a.m., I was at my safe in the closet. Shaking hands punched in the code. Inside were the last originals of my financial paperwork, at least the ones I'd thought were safe. But now, I noticed a gap. A folder was missing, the one labeled House Full Title Trust. That was the same folder I'd used to update Emmeline's name after she passed. Gone. I stumbled back, gripping the doorframe, my vision blurred, not from tears, but from a building fury I could no longer contain. The sun began to rise over Asheville, but it felt like darkness had only just begun. I called Howard again. He picked up on the first ring. "I checked," I said. A long pause. "And?" he asked quietly. "They've already started the process." "I was afraid of that," he muttered. "You said Kellen was with some older man, the property fixer." "Yeah, Thomas Brewer," he confirmed. "Been in shady business for decades. He flips houses, usually snatching them from folks too tired or too confused to fight back." "And Kellen willingly got involved with that guy?" "I can't say for sure," Howard replied, "but he didn't look like a hostage." I let the silence stretch. My throat was tight. "You need a lawyer," Howard said. "Now." "I will," I replied. "But first, I need to know exactly how far this has gone." By 8 a.m., I was at the local title company where I'd signed my mortgage renewal just 2 years prior. I knew the manager, a woman named Carla, who'd always treated me like family. She greeted me with a polite smile that vanished as soon as she saw my expression. "Something's wrong," I said simply. She led me to her office, and I explained everything: the signature I didn't sign, the missing folder, the transaction pending without my consent. She searched the system and pulled up a scanned copy of the transfer request. Her brows furrowed. "This shouldn't be here unless we received physical documentation and verified your ID in person," she said. "Then someone forged that too," I whispered. She paused. "Merrick, do you have a power of attorney on file anywhere?" My blood ran cold. "No," I said. "Why?" "Because one is attached to this transaction," she said, turning the screen toward me. It was a different document now. A durable power of attorney, allegedly signed by me, granting Kellen full control over my assets in case of cognitive decline. I stood slowly. "Print that," I said. "I need to take it to a lawyer, today." Walking back to my car, the wind cut sharper than it had in days. Leaves swirled around my feet like whispers. I clutched the papers tightly, thinking of Kellen as a boy, climbing trees, laughing freely. Now, all I could see was a man who'd handed my life to strangers and signed my name to lies. I didn't cry, not yet, but I knew the moment was coming. Back in the car, I called Howard again. "I've got proof," I told him. There was a pause. "And now?" he asked. I looked out the windshield toward the hills that framed the town I'd called home for 40 years. "Now," I said quietly, "I fight back." The fog still clung low to the street as I turned into my driveway. The headlights carved 2 weak beams through the mist, barely illuminating the hedges I trimmed just last week. Everything looked normal, quiet, still, but something about the silence didn't sit right, as if the house had been waiting for me, holding its breath since I left. I shut off the engine and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Howard's voice echoed in my ears. "They're coming for your house next." My fingers tightened. I hadn't even locked the door behind me when I ran out earlier. Had I? I stepped inside. The scent of coffee from this morning had gone stale. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly in the quiet. I stood there, listening, not just for sounds, but for absence. Something felt wrong, off, like a painting slightly tilted on the wall, or a familiar tune played in the wrong key. In the study, I reached for the desk lamp. The drawer where I kept old papers was open just enough to notice. That drawer was never open. I'd closed it myself when I filed away the envelope containing the property deeds. I bent down, slid it out. A few of the folders had been shuffled, edges bent. The envelope was gone. My gut twisted. Only 2 people knew about that drawer, and one of them was buried next to the river, beneath the dogwood tree we planted together after Kellen was born. The other had used that knowledge against me. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I told myself maybe I'd moved it, misplaced it, but I already knew better. In the hallway, I paused. A strange scent hung in the air. Cheap cologne, pungent and foreign. I wrinkled my nose. I hadn't worn cologne in years, but I knew that smell. A few months ago, at the hardware store, I'd passed a man talking to Kellen in the parking lot. Tall, broad-shouldered, slick smile. He wore a tan blazer that didn't quite match his jeans. As I walked by, the stench of that same overpowering cologne followed me to my truck. Back then, I chalked it up to business. Kellen had called him a friend, someone helping with real estate. Now I wasn't so sure. I walked from room to room, touching surfaces like a stranger. In the living room, the remote was upside down on the coffee table. Odd, I always placed it facing up. The couch cushion was indented in a spot I hadn't used all week. Then I checked the back door. Scratches, fresh and shallow, lined the edge near the lock. You'd miss them if you weren't looking. I knew those locks. Changed them myself last spring. There was no sign of forced entry, but someone had tested it, tried it, maybe more than once. I returned to the kitchen, trying to breathe evenly, to stay rational. On a whim, I opened the trash bin. Among coffee filters and yesterday's sandwich wrap sat a crumpled fast food receipt. I unfolded it, smoothing the grease-stained paper against the counter. Burger Shack. Combo meal. Timestamp. 8:42 p.m. 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago. I was at the cabin with Howard. 3 counties away. My hands trembled. Someone had eaten here. Sat in my kitchen, used my table. They hadn't just broken in. They'd made themselves comfortable. Suddenly, the silence of the house no longer felt like peace. It felt like warning. I went to the living room, dropped into the armchair, and stared at the receipt. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze from the ceiling fan. I didn't know what shook more, my hands or the foundations of everything I thought was still mine. This wasn't just about Kellen marrying in secret or selling his apartment. This wasn't just Reagan whispering in his ear. It was bigger, colder, coordinated. They weren't distancing themselves. They were deleting me. The fog outside pressed against the windows. Inside, I felt just as smothered. Everything I'd built, everything Emmeline and I had worked to protect, it was unraveling. And if I waited any longer, there might be nothing left. The law could take time, lawyers even longer, but the courthouse opened at 8, and come dawn, I'd be the first in line. The courthouse sat stoic under a gray sky, its marble steps slick from the drizzle that had passed through earlier that morning. I parked across the street, sat in the driver's seat for a moment, and looked at my reflection in the rear-view mirror. The face staring back at me looked older than it did yesterday, deeper lines, tired eyes, but behind all that, there was still a man who hadn't given up. I stepped out, briefcase in hand, heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to warn me. Inside, the county building buzzed with bureaucratic routine, people moving papers, phones ringing, muffled conversations in every corner. But to me, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. I approached the records window, greeted the young clerk behind the glass with a nod, and slid my ID through the slot. "I need to check on a deed transfer involving my property on Hawthorne Ridge," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The clerk tapped on her keyboard, eyes flicking between the screen and me, her brows furrowed. "There was a quitclaim deed filed yesterday morning," she said. "It shows transfer of ownership to Kellen Foster and spouse." I blinked. "That's impossible," I muttered. "I never signed anything." She printed out the documents and handed them to me. I recognized the house address, my house, but the signature, they'd tried to mimic mine. They'd gotten close, too close. But I knew my own hand, and this wasn't it. The angle of the M was wrong. The loop in the K was too tight. The ink wasn't from my pen. "You'll need to file a formal challenge," the clerk said gently. "It'll need to go through the courts." I nodded, but inside I was seething. I turned to leave, gripping the paperwork like it might evaporate in my hands. That's when I saw them, Kellen and her. They stood near the elevator, dressed like they were headed to a business luncheon. He looked polished, his tie neatly knotted, shoes shining. She had on a red coat, her hair swept back, makeup flawless, and in her hand, a manila folder, probably filled with whatever came next in their plan. I stepped behind a column, just close enough to hear. "If we close by November, we can avoid the capital gains hit," she said. Kellen nodded. "I'll schedule the contractor walkthrough next week." My throat went dry. They were planning to flip the house. My house. The one I'd worked 35 years to pay off. The one Emmeline and I had poured our lives into. They wanted it gone. Just another asset to strip and sell. I walked up behind them. "Kellen." He turned, startled. His eyes darted to the folder in her hand, then back to me. "Dad?" "I saw the deed," I said. "I saw what you filed." He straightened his shoulders, like he'd been rehearsing this. "You said you wanted us to have it someday." "Someday," I replied. "Not while I'm still living in it." Reagan took a step forward. "Maybe it's time you think about assisted living, Mr. Foster. A smaller place, less upkeep." I turned to her. "You don't get to decide that. Someone has to," she said, voice like ice. "You clearly can't manage things anymore." My hands trembled, but I held my ground. Around us, people had started to slow, turning their heads just enough to catch what was unfolding. I didn't care. Let them hear. "You broke into my house," I said. "You rifled through my papers, forged my name. Don't stand here pretending you're doing me a favor." Reagan's lips curled into a faint smile. "Call it what you want, but the papers are filed." Kellen wouldn't meet my eyes. You used to look me in the eye when you were proud of what you'd done, I said, quieter now. What happened to that boy? He swallowed. Things change. No, son, I said. People change. They turned to leave, heels clicking, footsteps echoing like a verdict down the marble hallway. I stood there, alone again, but something inside me had shifted. The fear was still there, but it had company now. Resolve. They were moving fast. I needed to move faster. The house greeted me with silence, but not the kind that soothes. It was the kind that crawls under your skin, whispering that things are falling apart faster than you can catch them. I set my keys on the counter, dropped into the kitchen chair, and stared at the spot where Emmeline's sewing basket used to sit. Gone now. Packed away. Like so much else. I reached for the drawer beneath it, fingers trembling slightly. Inside, tucked between old receipts and expired coupons, was her address book, spiral-bound, worn from years of flipping. Its corners curled like autumn leaves. Her handwriting curled too, elegant and clear, the way she always was. Janet Price. I hadn't heard that name in decades, but there it was in blue ink, under P. Emmeline had marked it with a small star. She trusted her. That was enough for me. I stared at the number, dialed, hung up, dialed again. Janet's office sat on the corner of a quiet street downtown, wedged between a bakery and a tailor that had long since stopped updating its window display. The sign read, Price Associates. Though judging by the sleepy receptionist and the single stack of mail on the desk, the associates part might have been more aspiration than reality. She met me at the door herself, shorter than I remembered, with silver hair pulled back neatly and eyes that hadn't lost their edge. Merrick. Janet, thanks for seeing me on short notice. I wish I could say it was a pleasure. She gestured me in, but I've got a feeling it's not good news. We sat in a modest conference room that smelled faintly of lemon polish and legal briefs. I told her everything, about the forged deed, the property sale, Kellen's words, Reagan's behavior, the scratches on my door, the receipt in my trash, the threats. She didn't interrupt, just listened, her face darkening shade by shade. When I finally finished, she sat back in her chair and said, "This is worse than I thought." I tried to smile. "That makes two of us." She leaned forward. "You said the quitclaim deed was filed yesterday?" "Yes, I saw it myself at the courthouse." "Then we're not too late. But we're close." Janet opened a thick folder labeled Emergency Civil Action. The words looked heavier than paper. "To fight this, we'll need to file an injunction immediately. If the property is flipped before we challenge the deed, reversing it becomes a nightmare, and you'll need to prove the signature was forged." "I know it was forged," I said. "Knowing isn't enough. We'll need a handwriting expert. And time. That word hit harder than it should have. "There's a chance," she continued, "that your son and his wife already leveraged the house, mortgaged it, pulled equity. Who knows?" My breath caught. "Is that legal?" "It's not," she said. "But once money's moved, untangling it becomes hellish." I stared down at my hands. "So what do I do?" Janet paused, then softened her voice. "You do what you're doing now. You fight, and I'll fight with you." I looked up. "Even if I can't pay full fees?" She waved it off. "Emmeline once brought me a casserole every week for 3 months when my husband was sick. This is me paying her back." Gratitude welled up like tears I didn't dare shed, but then she hesitated. "There's something else." That phrase. It always comes before the floor drops out. "I should tell you," she said slowly. "I represented Reagan once, just briefly. Small claims dispute with a landlord. She was pushy, aggressive. Didn't like being told no." My mouth went dry. "You think she'd remember you?" "I doubt it. It was years ago. But if this goes to court, and her lawyer finds out, they might try to make noise about a conflict of interest." "And is there one?" "Technically, no. But legally, they might spin it that way." I didn't speak right away. Trust didn't come easy anymore. But the truth was, I didn't have time to start over. "Do you still want to proceed?" she asked. I thought of the forged papers, the smug smile on Reagan's face. Kellen's voice, flat, final, telling me I'd never see him again. Yes, I said. We move forward. She nodded. Then we start tonight. I'll file the paperwork first thing in the morning. The sky was bleeding orange and purple as I stepped out of her office. The streets hummed softly. For the first time in days, I didn't feel completely alone. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I unlocked it. Stop digging, old man, or you'll regret it. No name, no punctuation, just a digital snarl on a glass screen. I stood there, wind catching my collar. Thumb hovering over block, but I didn't block it. I saved it. Because threats only work if you're scared. And I wasn't scared. I was ready. The message sat on my phone like a live wire. Stop digging, old man, or you'll regret it. I reread it 3 times, then a 4th. The words no less chilling the more I stared. It wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. Someone wanted me scared. Watched. Silenced. I stepped outside Janet's office and scanned the street. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the pavement, but my focus locked on a black sedan idling across from the building. Its windows were tinted too dark to see inside. The engine running low and steady. No movement. No plates I recognized. It could have been coincidence, but I'd lived long enough to know the scent of danger when it clung to the air. Back home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I left the blinds open just enough to keep an eye on the street. My nerves fired off at every passing car, every crunch of leaves in the front yard. The silence of the house, once comforting, now felt like a trap. I checked the locks twice, then again, and still, unease settled in my bones. Just after sunset, there was a knock at the door, 3 sharp raps. Not the mailman, not a neighbor. My chest tightened as I peered through the peephole. A man stood on my porch, late 30s, clean cut, dress shirt just a little too crisp. He smiled like it was rehearsed. "Mr. Merrick?" he asked when I cracked the door but didn't open it fully. "Who's asking?" "A friend," he said smoothly. "Just someone who thinks you might be heading into deep water. Kellen's not looking to make this ugly." "You're a good man. Nobody wants trouble." I narrowed my eyes. Trouble already knocked on my door the night he said I'd never see him again. He chuckled, like we were sharing an inside joke. "This whole legal thing, it could get messy, expensive. Maybe it's better to let go. Let the young folks handle things." "Is that what this is?" I asked, voice steady. "A friendly suggestion?" He shrugged, hands raised like he meant no harm. "Just think about what's worth fighting for at your age." I didn't say a word. I simply closed the door. Slowly, deliberately, then locked every bolt I had. That night, I met Janet at a quiet diner off Hendersonville Road. We sat in a booth near the back, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and menus that hadn't been updated in years. It felt safe, if only because it was ordinary. She sipped her coffee, frowning. "They're starting early," she said after I told her about the visit. "I figured intimidation would come, but this soon?" Janet shook her head. "It means they're nervous. That's good. But it also means they're not playing fair." I nodded. "We need to know what they're doing behind closed doors." Janet leaned in. "Then we stay quiet for now. No formal filings yet. I'll have one of my contacts at the clerk's office look into the paperwork, see if anything new's been slipped through." I was still on edge when I got home, but at least now I had a plan. The next afternoon, Janet called. I answered before the second ring. "They filed a second mortgage," she said without preamble. "What?" "2 weeks ago, while you were up at your friend's cabin. It's in your name, forged, obviously, but filed and notarized like the real thing." I gripped the receiver tight. "How much?" "Almost the full equity. If they sell soon, you're left with nothing." That was the moment the ground shifted beneath me. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. Calculated and surgical. I didn't just lose a son, I was losing my life, piece by piece, in ink and signatures I never gave. That evening, I arrived home as twilight bled into night. I pulled into the driveway and immediately saw it, my front gate. Wide open. I never left it that way. Heart pounding. I stepped out slowly. The porch light flickered as I climbed the steps. There, Resting dead center on the welcome mat was a plain envelope. No markings, no postage. Inside was a single photograph, me, earlier that day, walking out of the diner with Janet. The angle was from across the street, a long lens catching my face mid-turn. I stood there in the porch light, the photo trembling in my hands. They weren't just after my home. They were already inside my life. The forged mortgage documents sat heavy on my desk, every slanted stroke of my supposed signature mocking me. The notary's stamp, a small embossed circle I might have missed in another lifetime, carried a name I hadn't seen in years. Mallory Jameson, Kellen's high school classmate. Quiet girl. Her father used to run the local feed store. I remembered her face. Thin-lipped, nervous even as a teenager. The thought that she'd knowingly notarized a false document under my name made my stomach churn. But it wasn't her face that haunted me. It was the idea that this scheme stretched deeper than I wanted to admit. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the notary registration. A chirpy voicemail answered. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I slipped on my coat and grabbed my folder. The air outside was thick, not with rain, but with the weight of something creeping closer. I took the back roads, hoping to arrive unnoticed. The insurance office was tucked in a strip mall behind a Dollar General. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above an outdated waiting area. A bored receptionist barely glanced up as I walked in. "Mallory Jameson here?" I asked, clutching my folder like a shield. She appeared from a side door a moment later, her face blanching slightly when she saw me. "Merrick," she said quietly. "I wasn't expecting." "I imagine you weren't," I cut in, keeping my voice low but firm. "We need to talk." She led me into her cramped office. Her hands trembled as she pushed aside a stack of auto insurance forms. "I shouldn't," she muttered. "You already did," I said, laying the document down in front of her, my name staring up from the page. Her eyes flicked toward the closed door, and then back to me. "He came in with someone else, a man in a gray suit. I didn't know what was happening at first, and by the time I figured it out, they made it clear I'd be involved, whether I liked it or not." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They said it was all legal, just paperwork." But the way that man watched me, I knew better. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces falling into place. Kellen hadn't acted alone. He was the face, but not the mind behind this. "Can you testify?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "If it comes to court, maybe. But not now. Not unless I want trouble." I didn't push her further. Fear had already gripped her throat. After thanking her, I left the office and drove straight downtown to meet Janet. She was waiting near the archives building, her usual calm face drawn tight. "I pulled transfer records tied to your block," she said as we walked inside. "And you're not the first." She opened her laptop and showed me 3 elderly homeowners, all within 10 miles of me, all with forged signatures and fast sale deeds passed through a chain of limited liability companies. The timing of each was the same, right after a sudden family change or health scare. "It's organized," I said quietly. Janet nodded. "And dangerous. They know how to hide their tracks." As we exited the building, the echo of our footsteps filled the concrete parking garage. I was already unlocking my car when the black sedan appeared again, this time blocking the aisle. A man stepped out. No words, just a look, calculated, calm. His smirk held the same confidence as someone flipping a switch on a trap they knew couldn't be escaped. Janet stepped beside me, her voice calm but laced with tension. "Get in the car, now." We didn't speak until we were back on the road, and even then, only in fragments. "Same guy who came with Kellen," I muttered. "He's not bluffing," she replied. "But that's the point. He wants you scared enough to stop." When I got home that evening, I locked every door behind me and poured myself a glass of water, hands steadier than I expected. I was tired, no doubt, but I wasn't broken. I didn't notice the blinking red light on my landline until I passed the hallway. One voicemail, time-stamped just 10 minutes earlier. I hit play. Kellen's voice, stripped of emotion, filled the silence. "Dad, you're making this harder than it has to be. You have until Friday." There was no threat in the tone, But that was what made it worse. It wasn't anger, it was certainty. He believed he'd already won. But as I stood there, the voicemail replaying in my mind, I found myself whispering aloud, "You've underestimated me before, son." Friday was 4 days away, but it might as well have been tomorrow. The moment I opened my eyes, the weight of time sat on my chest like a stone. I could hear the steady tick of the wall clock in the hallway, each second a reminder that the clock wasn't just ticking on a deadline, but on everything I had left. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee untouched, stacks of papers surrounding me. Every scrap mattered now: photocopies, handwritten notes, receipts, the forged deed, Janet's scribbled legal terms. I labeled everything methodically. Even though my hands shook with the effort, I wasn't a lawyer, but I could damn well organize a battle plan. I'd spent a lifetime solving problems with my hands. Now, I had to do it with paper, but paperwork wouldn't stop them. It was time to look one of them in the eye. Janet called just after noon. "I set something up," she said. "He's not active duty anymore, but he knows that man you saw. You need to hear what he has to say." She didn't elaborate, just told me to meet them at a diner on the edge of downtown, one of those places with the same cracked vinyl booths that hadn't been replaced in 30 years. I knew the one. I'd taken Kellen there after his soccer games when he was 10. He used to order chocolate milk and grilled cheese, legs swinging under the table, telling me he'd buy me a house on a lake one day. Funny how promises turn into weapons. Janet waved me over to a corner booth. Sitting across from her was a man with a face like sandpaper and eyes that didn't blink much. He wore a simple jacket, no tie, but carried himself like someone who'd once been feared and respected in equal measure. "Name's Rick, retired detective. I keep tabs on certain faces," he said, nodding toward the coffee pot rather than asking. "You said the guy in the gray suit, short hair, always watching but never talking?" I nodded. Rick leaned in. "He's part of a network, real estate scams targeting elderly property owners. They get you to sign something under pressure, or forge it if they can't. Once the paper's in the system, it's like peeling paint off brick to undo it." My gut clenched. "So I'm not the first?" "Not even close," he said. "But your case is heating up faster than most. That text message you got, and the photo, that means they're nervous, which makes them sloppy or dangerous." Janet looked at me with a kind of warning in her eyes. Going to the courthouse officially could trigger them to act. "Let them," I said. "I'm done playing defense." The courthouse loomed that afternoon like a silent judge waiting to hear my plea. I walked up the wide steps with my evidence folder tucked under my arm. The air felt heavier than usual, but maybe that was just my nerves. At the top of the stairs, a man brushed past me, clean-shaven, sunglasses, suit just a little too crisp for someone not in court. "Clock's ticking, old man," he muttered as he passed. I stopped in my tracks, turned. He kept walking, didn't look back. I pressed forward anyway. That evening, I found my mailbox hanging open, its contents scattered across the walkway. Legal letters. Gone. Only bills remained, as if the vultures had picked through what they needed. Inside my doorframe, something caught my eye. A Polaroid photo, taped to the wood like a final notice. My house, taken from across the street. The word "sold" scrawled in red marker across the front lawn. I didn't move for a long time, just stood there, the wind nudging at my coat. They were telling me the sale was inevitable. Then the phone rang. Kellen's voice came through, low and calm, like he was reading off a script. "Friday's your last chance. Choose. Dad, family, or the fight." The line went dead. I stood in my living room, the photo in one hand, the phone still warm in the other, and I knew then I could lose both. The sun hadn't yet crested over the hills when I stepped out of the car in front of the courthouse. The old stone building loomed ahead, stoic and indifferent to the storm swirling inside me. My hands clutched the worn leather handle of my briefcase, the weight of its contents heavier than mere paper. Janet was already waiting by the steps, a tall figure in a navy coat, her jaw set like a woman ready for battle. The retired detective, Sam Harlan, stood beside her, sipping black coffee from a dented thermos. "You ready?" Janet asked, her voice low and steady. "As I'll ever be," I answered, my throat dry. We passed through security and entered the mediation chamber, the air inside crisp with anticipation. At the far end of the room, Kellen leaned back in his chair with a confidence that made my stomach turn. He was dressed sharply, gray blazer, crisp white shirt, no tie. Reagan wasn't with him today, but the man in the gray suit sat beside him, fingers tented, eyes cold. For a brief moment, Kellen's gaze met mine. No trace of shame, just a flicker of something unreadable, disdain or doubt. The session began. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman with glasses perched on her nose, invited each party to speak. Kellen started, spinning a story of concern for my well-being, claiming I had offered the property voluntarily in a moment of clarity. I let him talk. I let the lies pile up like rotten leaves in autumn. Then it was my turn. I opened the briefcase and handed over the stack of papers Janet had helped me organize, signed statements from neighbors, time-stamped evidence, surveillance stills, and a notarized timeline of my whereabouts during the supposed signature dates. But the final blow came from Sam, who stepped forward and slid a small recorder across the table. "A phone conversation," he said, "between Mr. Kellen Rhodes and an associate, recorded legally by a party aware of their involvement, discussing the sale and intention to push his father into assisted living to expedite liquidation." Kellen's face drained of color. He turned toward the gray-suited man, who remained eerily composed, until two officers stepped through the door. "Mr. Trenton Hale," one said, reading from a warrant. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and violation of real estate laws under North Carolina state statute." The man stood without protest, hands cuffed behind his back. As they led him out, his eyes met mine briefly, not with hatred, but with something worse, amusement. Kellen sat frozen, his smirk gone. He looked like a boy again, the same one who once cried when he lost his first baseball game, but the weight of what he'd done was no childhood mistake. The judge issued an immediate injunction, nullifying all property transfers, freezing accounts, and flagging the address for fraudulent activity. I remained the sole legal owner of the house I built, the one I had nearly lost to my own blood. Outside, in the sharp midday sun, Kellen followed me to the courthouse steps. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he said. "I was drowning. The debt, the pressure, Reagan, she had plans." "You let her weaponize our family," I said, voice low. "You used my trust like a blank check. I thought I could fix it before it hurt you. You hurt me the moment you shut that door in my face." He looked away, swallowing hard. I sighed. "You're still my son, Kellen. That hasn't changed. But trust doesn't come free anymore. You'll have to rebuild it, brick by brick." He nodded once, eyes glistening, but said nothing more. Later that week, Janet met me at my house, papers in hand. "I've officially transferred my share of the old trust your wife left into your name," she said. "It's not much, but it'll make it harder for anyone to touch your assets again," Sam added. "And I've got a guy who can help you lock this place down, legally and physically." Their support felt like a life raft in waters I'd barely stayed afloat in. For every betrayal, there had been unexpected grace. Weeks passed. The leaves began to change, the way they always do this time of year in Asheville. One afternoon, I drove up the narrow road to the cemetery on the hill. Emmeline's headstone stood clean and polished, a bouquet of mums resting at its base. "I made it through," I whispered, kneeling. "And I think I did what you would have wanted." There was a peace in the air, one I hadn't felt in months. The kind of silence that doesn't demand answers, just acknowledgement. As I turned to leave, I saw a figure by the gate, Kellen. He held 2 cups of coffee in one hand. No tie again, but his shirt was tucked in this time. No words passed between us at first. Then, with a quiet voice, he said, "I figured we could talk." I nodded, stepping beside him. We sat on the bench just outside the gate, steam curling from our cups. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something.